segue into, so we talked about the responsibilities. What are the benefits of mortgage servicing rates?
Great. So the agencies, it has a little more to do with how you securitize it, but the agencies all pay money for you to perform your obligations to a certain level. Right. And so the question is how much and is it worth it, right? So that's where you want to, that's something you have to model and you have to make your own assessment of is it going to be worth it. So when we do our execution, we say, well, we think this one's worth it, so we'll retain it based on what we could sell it away for and capture that risk earlier. But the money is typically calculated in what we call a strip. And so it's usually something around 25 basis points. So that's an annualized number. And then
So a quarter of a point per year.
Yep, and then they chop it into 12ths and they effectively calculate it on the principal every single month. And that income strip comes in and we pay our bills with them.
So basically it's a 0.25% of the loan amount per year per month.
Basically.
Okay.
Yeah, it does range. It could be up to north of 50. It kind of depends on the type of security, but the broad number that the industry sees is 25.
Cool. So where that kind of comes into play, and I was going to show this, is we are recording this for monumental purposes Friday, December 15th at about 9:30 a.m. And we're going to show right here. This is what our MBS pricing looks like today. So where this gets curious, and I think where the rubber hits the road a lot of times for loan originators, is we're always looking at MBS Live, MBS Highway. We're looking at these things and we see, okay, we're always looking at this stuff. So right now we're typically selling rates in the mid 7s, but we're always, for comparison, trying to figure out what the market is going to do. We're looking at MBS securities that have note rates of like 6.5%.
Yep.
So are the MSRs part of the thing that bridge the gap between them?
Absolutely. So there's two types of kind of spread there. One is the MSR, the SRP. That's really the concept of Fannie doesn't have the Q form. So they or the agency, I should back it up. The agency doesn't have that servicing bandwidth. And so the servicer, so as I said earlier, all the agencies, they don't have a Q form. So what they really want to do is pay a portion of their interest to cover that 25 bit strip or whatever that strip ended up being. So they take a portion of that and make sure that the servicer, the master servicer as we call it, the master servicer gets their 25 bit strip. So that's a portion of it. The other portion ends up being kind of commingled in what we call the premium on the loan. And that they all have, when you buy bonds, they get slotted into certain coupons. And so typically you do that, see that plus or minus kind of 50 bit range when you issue versus where the actual mortgage note rate is.
So basically the paying that 0.25% per year per month is part of the reason that you're selling rates at 7.5, but you're looking at securities of 6.5.
Correct.
Because money's got to come from somewhere. And
in that extreme example, roughly half. Yep, exactly right.
So that's part of that, and then you got G fees and things like that. So part of that's going to come into that. So that's a big part of that, of why that's in there. And then also, we look at it, and so the 6.5 bond today is paying 102.28. So basically, on the bond side of it, that's only 2.25 points, which isn't enough to pay originators, branch expenses, product guy, CFO, all that stuff. So part of that comes from the MSR, right?
Yes, and that's where it gets probably a little more muddy in price. But roughly, let's talk about what MSR value is first, and then that value of MSR could actually be applied to any coupon. When you price a loan, it doesn't just obviously include premium. You also have a rich fee and those things, which also luckily pay some of our bills too, because sometimes premium disappears completely. So the way we price loans has many components to it, but what an MSR is worth typically is really based on what we call a discounted cash flow model. So a discounted cash flow model is the income or the cash flows into the future, and then we have a discount rate backwards. It's no different than if you looked at real estate and you wanted to buy an asset, rental property, and you want to say, well, how much money would this make me, and would this rental home actually pay its bills or not? It's no different. That's the way the valuation is come up with. It's not an appraisal. It's not anything else. It's really around that discounted cash flow. So with that, what we say is typically MSR historically has traded, and this is a really rough number because it's a very volatile asset, but a point is probably a good place to start.
So that's one of those. So for the people that work on the front lines of mortgage, it's important to understand that when you look at your rate sheet price, it's really two things. It's what can we sell this loan in the bond market, which is what we all look at on MBS Live, MBS Highway, and then a valuation of the service. So I think one of the important things is that I learned that's really interesting because, like you said, it's variable, is that, so we're talking about its servicing value, let's say it's a 0.25 point per year per month. But in order to do our pricing today, we have to assign a servicing value to that loan in order to put it into the price. So you want to talk things about like mults and how servicing values are
Yeah,
valued.
sure. So mult's another term that definitely gets thrown around there. A lot of people are like, what do you mean a molt? So when we talk about 25 bips strip, a molt is simply saying the coupon, if it trades at a point, would be at a 4 molt. One point divided by 25 bips is effectively 4. And so that's a 4 molt. If you've heard it, when we're up to a 5 molt, that means it'd be trading around 125. So if you have a wider strip, often maybe with like a Ginnie Mae, that strip might be 30 or 33 bips or something like that. That molt would change.
And that's and basically the molt meaning the prediction by the person buying the mortgage servicing right of how long they think that loan is going to stick around on their books.
It is. It's a function of price and gross income. The other parts of that, though, when you think about molt, is your costs associated with it. So the cost obviously is tied to that obligation to service.
Yeah.
How you fulfill that obligation can be different.
So like the low FICO's going to be a higher probability of having to have your collectors do more work to get the loan. You might have to make payments for them. So each servicer is going to assign a different cost associated to it with how much they think that has a likelihood of default. And then also rate movement. So you want to talk a little bit about how that multiple and servicing value has changed with predictions of rates, because we